Hello, 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 and welcome. It is Tuesday, April 15th, 2021. It's Thursday, isn't it? Look at me go, off to a killer start tonight. It is Thursday, April 15th, 2021. As always, before we get started, please jump in the chat, say hello, let us know you're here, let us know where you're from. All the things. We have two wonderful guests tonight and an absolutely necessary, important topic that we're really looking forward to discussing with you. So we always like to give it just a couple minutes to get people loaded in. Grab a seat. Beverages are to the right. Pigs in a blanket to the left. Please help yourself. Hi, Simone from Frederick, Maryland. How are you? And if you're just joining us, we'll get started in just a minute. I just said this, but you never know. Somebody just could come in. Please say hello. Let us know where you're from. Let us know how you're doing. Annalisa from Seattle. I'm glad you're good, Simone. And we will get started in exactly 45 seconds. This is OCD Town Hall on Sexual Orientation OCD, which we're very, very excited to discuss. Suffering second dose effects. Oh man, Simone, I had mine on Monday last week and it laid me out for Tuesday for sure. And then it just went away and I felt great. So I totally understand. Hi, Carol from Cleveland. Hi, Paola from California. My old stomping grounds. Like a year ago. And we'll get started in just about 10 seconds. So if you're just joining us, please feel free to say hi. Let us know that you're here. We will be opening it up to questions. Amy in Nashville, you have a friend in Nashville. And Kenneth in Houston, Texas. Hey, Kenneth, it's good to see you. And with that, I think we'll get rolling. So hi, and welcome. My name is Ethan Smith. I am the national advocate for the IOCDF, which simply means I have OCD and I like to talk about it all the time until we figure this thing out, which we're close. It will happen. Good things and amazing things are happening. With all of that, we have a phenomenal guest for you today and a great conversation. So please line up your questions. If you put them in the comment threads, we'll go in order. So feel free to start lining them up or incorporate them into the talk as well. Eric Broach, the man, the myth, the trivia legend in the house tonight from Houston, Texas. He currently has $7,080 in IOCDF gift cards. I'm curious to see what he will get. You can only get so many hoodies, Eric. So let me get the housekeeping out of the way so we can get to the topic at hand. So real quick, this town hall is intended to serve as educational content and is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please be sure to work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline and should not be used if you are in distress or feel unsafe. If you're in a crisis or ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room. Call 911 or call the suicide prevention hotline at 800-273-8255, number just below there. As always, we want to be respectful and kind to everyone in the room and create as safe a space as possible, especially when we address topics like this. It's important to note that this is live on the interwebs and will live on Facebook, YouTube, and those things for at least initial eternity. So with that in mind, just be mindful of that when you're asking questions, but please be respectful and kind. We like to support everyone and we like to be supported as well. We're all here for each other. And so if we could keep that in mind, that would be wonderful. Hello, Armando from Albuquerque and Not Alone Notes. Welcome, Not Alone Notes. I'm guessing it's Molly. Hi, Molly. But if it's Morgan, I hope you're well too. All right, let's get to our panelists. So first with us, we have Dr. Judy Mier-Chairez, is a postdoctoral associate at the Nashville. I got that right, didn't I? Yes. Okay, sweet. I almost wrote it phonetically when you told it to me. I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. She is a postdoctoral associate at the Nashville OCD and Anxiety Treatment Center. She is a member of the IOCDF Diversity Advisory Council and is passionate about making quality treatment available to people of all backgrounds and identities. Thank you so much, Dr. Judy, for being here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And I think that's all of our passions, honestly, is not to steal your passion, but I think effective, affordable, accessible, quality treatment, so we can, get people access when they get diagnosed, and not, 14 years later. And
I'm happy to share that passion.
Awesome. I think there's enough to go around for sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Judy. And we also have with us Zach Westerbeck, who is not new to our town halls, and he's been on Just Ethan as well. Zach is a mental health advocate, national speaker, college success coach, and author of You're Not Alone, who was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder in 2016. During that time period, he experienced severe anxiety, deep depression, and thoughts of suicide. After hitting his rock bottom moment, he sought help and started to recover. Through his recovery process, he became mental health first aid certified and now travels the country educating thousands of students on the fundamentals of mental health. Welcome, Zach Westerbeck.
Thank you for having me, Ethan. Great to be here.
We're excited to have you. And the RCD has put a link to Zach's social media and website as well. Feel free to click on that and check on it anytime you feel like it. Hey, Rhonda in Louisiana, and Shaitana from Austin, and Caroline. Good to see everyone here. All right, so tonight's topic is sexual orientation OCD. As always, please don't hesitate to weigh in comments. This is a collaborative conversation. If you have questions, we will get to open Q&A, usually about 7:45, but please feel free to put your questions in, and we'll try to get to them as soon as possible as well. So with that, Dr. Judy, why don't we just quickly define sexual orientation OCD. From a clinical perspective, what does that look like?
Sure, absolutely. So sexual orientation OCD is the experience of recurrent, distressing thoughts related to one's sexuality. And so that can take the form of wondering, am I not the sexuality that I believe I identify with? A fear of becoming a sexuality that you don't currently identify with, or a fear of being perceived as being of a sexuality that you do not currently identify with. And there, of course, as with all OCD, there are compulsions that come with it as well that we can talk about, but it all around relieving that distress of being uncertain.
It's got to be, I think all OCD is obviously challenging and difficult, but, reaching puberty in times of sexuality and is just already a natural confusing part of life, right? Where we're sort of coming into our own and determining, who we're attracted to, what we're attracted to, what we like and don't like. And I would imagine that sexual orientation OCD on top of that, or that subtype or symptom of OCD, can definitely be extremely distressing and can really seem probably hard to tease out initially without, proper treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. And there certainly is a distinction between sexual orientation OCD and questioning, when somebody really isn't sure about their sexual orientation, might truly identify with something else. And so there are ways to distinguish the two, and really to boil it down are those thoughts distressing to you personally if you imagine yourself as this identity, or somebody perceiving you as that identity, or is it something that is more in line with what you see yourself as, that even exciting of like, oh, I feel validated, this could be something that really fits for me, as opposed to recurrent just doubts that don't really have much of a leg to stand on.
Thank you, Dr. Judy. Zach, if you wouldn't mind, why don't you share a little bit about your own personal experience with SOCD?
Yeah, absolutely, Ethan. And thank you, Dr. Judy, for that clinical definition. I think it's funny, Ethan, because you asked, or you kind of mentioned that confusing time period where you're coming of age and you're starting to figure out, okay, this is the group I identify with. This is the sexual orientation that I identify with. And for me, and by the way, I think that everybody has their own unique journey. I never questioned growing up. It was very clear. My parents said that I because again, when I was looking for reassurance, my parents said that I came out of the womb liking females. So for me, my confusion, and again, I know that because I asked my mom that same question about 1,000 times when I was trying to sort out what was going on internally. But for me, it would have been roughly around 2015, 2016, where these intrusive thoughts started to ramp up in my mind. And it really started with just, and Dr. Judy talked about this or touched on this, that it was this seed of doubt where I remember honestly the experience distinctly. But it was basically, an interaction between myself and another guy where it was literally just a thought of like, oh, he's a handsome guy. And that thought spiraled into what you talked about in my bio, which eventually became deep depression, extreme anxiety, and thoughts of suicide, because these intrusive thoughts started literally running my entire life. And I'm very happy to dive into what kind of thoughts, like specifics if you want in terms of thoughts, but that was basically the seed of doubt that was planted in 2015 consciously, where I was like, whoa, okay, could I be into, like, do I like guys? I don't know. Wait, what? No, I'm confused. And then but to Dr. Judy's point, it caused this. I mean, it was very uncomfortable for me. And so, yeah, that's kind of how things started.
Thank you, Zach. And it looks like we have clinicians as well on, which is great. So we can definitely speak to you guys as well. Thank you for your questions. We'll get to them one moment. I think, Zach, I'll tee you up with some specifics from Dr. Judy first, in terms of in your own practice and working with the OCD population, how do you see this manifest? I know we talk sort of more generally, but in more specific ways, how do you see this manifest? What are some common compulsions you see around SOCD?
Yeah. Me first, right?
Yeah.
Or are we going to Zach? Me first?
No,
okay.
Dr.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, a lot of different ways. And so it can be something that Zach actually mentioned. It often involves mental compulsions. And so a lot of it can be mental review of a previous interaction with somebody of a gender that you don't identify yourself being attracted to. And I'll make a quick note here, if I can segue for a second. I keep saying it in that way of a sex that you're not attracted to, because historically it has been called homosexuality OCD. But we do also know that people that identify as sexual minorities experience this form of OCD too, and it can take the form of, well, am I actually straight? And that being the obsession. So that's why I'm wording the things the way that I am. But it can be mental review of previous interactions with somebody of a sex that you don't identify as being attracted to. It can be avoidance, largely, avoiding maybe appearing in a certain way, wearing certain clothes that is a sexuality you're afraid that others may perceive you as, avoiding watching certain sexually charged television shows, movies, looking at magazines, checking yourself too. And so whether that be the mental checking, as I mentioned earlier, it can also be checking for sexual responses to certain things. And so it may actually, instead of avoidance, alternatively be seeking out sexually charged content and checking to see, ooh, did I have a physical reaction to that? Am I aroused? Does that mean that I may now be gay, that I may now be straight, or whatever it is that you don't identify as?
Let's jump on that a little deeper, and then we'll turn to Zach for a second. When you talk about arousal, let's talk about a little bit that you can feel, arousal in various areas, and how that physiological reaction is perceived, how the OCD perceives it, that it is okay to feel that it is normal and part of. Yeah, if you could speak a little bit to the arousal.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That is an experience that, again, from my clinical experience, I've seen be the most distressing to individuals, is when you do experience a physical arousal to something that you wouldn't think that you would, or you wish that you didn't. And really what we say is that sexual content is going to elicit many times sexual arousal for most people. whether or not it's something that you want to engage in or that you would fantasize about or think is enjoyable or anything like that, sexual content, period, elicits sexual arousal.
Thank you. And yes, this is Christina said, gender identification OCD or sexual orientation OCD. This is, as you said, Dr. Judy, this is sexual orientation OCD. So Zach, why don't you give us a little insight into, what maybe one or two specific thoughts looked like for you, and what were some compulsions around those obsessions?
Absolutely, and I will say that it was a man that identified as homosexual who wrote a blog post about his fear of being straight that made me realize, wow, this is truly sexual orientation OCD, and just OCD in general is truly amazing, and in a sense, because it really impacts all of us, and it really hits all of us at kind of at our core belief systems and how we identify in the world. And his article, by the way, and I don't even know his name, but I love him because he is the one that propelled me forward into recovery. Because when he wrote that article, I was like, if he could feel that way, then it makes complete and total sense why I feel this way. But I mean, I had all sorts of thoughts. Like, I would be walking down the street in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I would see another guy walking my direction with maybe like a shirt that fit his body nicely. And a thought would pop in my head like, oh, he's got a nice chest. And I'd be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, I can't have this thought. Like, what is this? Like, no, reverse. So now I'm in my head while I'm walking, super anxious, very panicked. Like, how could this be happening to me? I've always identified as straight. And then I would go into one of my mental compulsions would be to go back into the past and think about times that I had some sort of engagement with a female, and then check to see that I still liked that and that I got a reaction from that. And it just became this very, very vicious cycle where at first it was here and there, but as it continued to get worse and I continued to compulse more aggressively, it got to the point where I was compulsing 24/7 internally. So nobody could see what I was doing, but I was at the worst point, I was completely exhausted because I was using all of my cognition, all of my brain power to fight back against my brain.
Thanks so much for sharing, Zach. Judy, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, a bit of a Pandora's box, but that is so common in OCD that it grabs onto a thought that is pretty neutral in sense, or is pretty typical, right? Or even if it is an intrusive kind of scary thought, it clings onto it and it says, ooh, I need to figure that out. Instead of accepting, like, sometimes we have weird thoughts that go through our mind and we can just let them flow in and flow out. We don't need to engage with it and figure it out, right? And so that initial thought of, and that's not even a weird thought, right? But some weird thoughts too, that somebody has a tight shirt, your mind was like, hang on a second, what was that? I need to figure that out, because what OCD doesn't like is uncertainty. It doesn't like, oh, well, maybe I thought he was attractive and maybe that's okay. I still like the woman that I'm with, right? But OCD wants 100%. It wants to know for sure, am I 100% straight? Because 90 is not enough.
Yeah, that uncertainty, it wants certainty regardless of, and this is where it kind of crosses over, where you really identify, like, OCD is OCD. Yes, subtype symptoms is how we relate. It's how it manifests, but the need for certainty and the discomfort around uncertainty, that is OCD, and that exists in all subtypes and all symptomatology. Kerr, to answer your question, absolutely, we do interact with viewers, and if anybody watching has questions, please feel free to load them in the comment section, and we will get to them momentarily. In fact, there's some good questions now, and then we can come back to any topics that we want to talk about. But there's some pretty general questions I think that it would be good to dive into. So at 7:10, William, and we never finish the questions anyway, so maybe this will be the first time I'll ever where we get to all the questions. I don't know. We'll see. Challenge is put in the gauntlet. William Schultz at 7:10 p.m. Wrote, As a practicing clinician specializing in OCD, I've recently been wondering about the dynamic between clients catastrophizing, for instance, being gay, and internalized stigma, internalized homophobia within the context of SOCD. Any thoughts or insights would be wonderful. I always like to start with the individual that's nodding their head the most. So, Judy, I'll let you start with this.
That's going to get me a lot. I'm a head nodder.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing from this, and let me know if I'm not totally understanding the question, is fears of underlying homophobia or internalized homophobia and what that might mean for that individual if they were to be gay or a different orientation, and how do we distinguish that? Or I guess I'm not really sure.
Absolutely. William, no problem. William, if you want to, maybe if you're still here, just post in the comments if that sounds like the correct interpretation of the question that you're asking. We just want to make sure that we understand you correctly before weighing in. So we'll put a pin on that for just half a second. Thank you for asking for clarity, Judy. Appreciate it. And I'll just give you just 1 or 2 minutes to pop in and leave a comment. Sometimes there's a slight delay. And in the meantime, let's go ahead. I like Taylor's question because I have some thoughts, but I'll toss this out. So as someone at 7:11 p.m., Fran, as someone who works with the OCD population, what are some self-compassion ideas for someone who does identify as part of the LGBTQIA+ community and treats SOCD? Zach, I'm going to start with you. From a lived experience, self-compassion perspective, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, of course, looking at it through my lens, right? Just my own lived experience and how I identify sexually, of course. But when it comes to self-compassion, I think the biggest tool that I started using was meditation. And why I think that that's a beneficial tool when it comes to self-compassion is the principles that are taught in meditation and mindfulness, and it's one of the biggest tools with ERP, is centered around acceptance. And I think a big part of self-compassion and falling in love with yourself is acceptance of whoever you are, however you identify. And for me, I think the reason why I don't have intrusive thoughts at all anymore, like basically down to 0%, which I always want to say, like, I don't like when people say that you can't never have thoughts anymore, but from a self-compassion standpoint, I got to such a deep level of acceptance that I could be any sort of orientation and that's completely okay. And to me, that has been the deepest form of self-compassion, like really going in deep and exploring what it could mean to be a different orientation and approaching that with acceptance. Of course, there's surface level ways to show self-compassion, physical fitness, massages, self-care, those kind of concepts. But for me, I think it was really about going in deep and really cultivating acceptance.
Thank you so much, Zach. I actually have some strong thoughts on this, but let me let Judy weigh in first.
Okay. One of the things that I'm thinking about is the fact that this person is a clinician, and what are some of the interpretations that you may be making from the person that you were treating with sexual orientation OCD, and is it maybe, does this person have some fears based in homophobia that are triggering your own feelings about your identity and having to hear those aloud? Is it in generating the exposures that you're going to do that can often draw on stereotypes, right? That we use that for sexual orientation. And so I think framing it in that way and framing it for yourself of, okay, I am doing this work to help somebody else who's really struggling with this. Maybe some gratitude that you do feel more comfortable in your own sexual orientation, and going back to your values and why this is important to you, and recognizing that it's okay to have some feelings about sessions that are particularly personal to you as well.
Absolutely. I love self-compassion. That's why I said I have strong opinions toward it. It was really life-changing for me, and I like to say that for me, it's like learning Japanese backwards. It's just not a language that I speak naturally. I can be really compassionate toward other people. I'm a real asshole to myself. Sorry. And so, the beautiful thing I like about self-compassion is that it's universal and it's global, and you can literally take it and throw it on anyone. The precepts for self-compassion toward someone with harm OCD or contamination is exactly the same self-compassion we would ask people to practice with SOCD or moral scrupulosity, or you name the subtype or symptom. There's some great, although I like to just regurgitate what other smarter people have said and then just claim it as my own. I'm not going to do that. But one of my favorite authors around this subject is Kristin Neff. Her workbooks are really, really good, and I kind of swear by them. I don't know why I'm blanking on the workbook that I love. I think it's the self-compassion workbook. I don't think it's for OCD. I'm actually Googling right now. The Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook. Okay, that's what it's called. It's really, really good. I actually went through it with my therapist, and it's kind of my Bible. But self-compassion overall, and that goes for anybody watching, it's all about listening to your inner critic, understanding how you talk to yourself versus how you talk to other people, how you treat yourself versus how others treat you. How would you want to be treated? And it's quite remarkable to discover how you treat yourself. And you realize, you're that voice in your head that just kind of screams nasty stuff. If you took that from anybody else, like you would not be friends with that person. You would not want them in your life. But when I have that voice, I'm like, you're right. I'm that guy. I'm terrible. I'm horrible. I buy everything that you're saying. And then I talk to somebody, I have some realizations, I get some insight and objectivity, and I go, liar. I can't believe I fell for you. And then the next day I'm like, yes, you're right. They keep selling me over and over again. So there's some great resources on self-compassion. Kimberly Quinlan's Your Anxiety Toolkit and CBT School, and her Instagram is excellent on self-compassion. She's got a new book coming out, I think in October, that's also all about self-compassion. So I'm all about self-compassion. I probably didn't give anything specific about self-compassion, but dive into it, look at some of the books and Instagram accounts and things like that. But I will tell you that, self-compassion for LGBTQ or any other subtype, it's no different. It's all self-compassion. It's all effective regardless of subtype, symptomatology, whatever it is. Kenneth at 716 asked, can a man be both homosexual and have OCD thoughts concerning sexual orientation? Can you be both gay and have H or SOCD? I think definitely Judy touched on that. If you want to expound on that just a little bit more, I have some thoughts as well, and I'm sure Zach does as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, the short answer is yes, that absolutely they can, and it could be, around their wondering if they're actually straight, right? Remember that the core of OCD is that doubt of the sexual orientation. OCD is the doubt or not wanting to be perceived as a different sexual orientation, and so absolutely, you would just, I guess, flip it from the way that you would typically talk about homosexuality. OCD, they may be wondering that they're straight. They may be wondering if other people might perceive them as straight. They may be wondering if they will perpetually be in doubt. That can be a part of SOCD as well. That, am I ever going to know for sure that I am completely gay? Is there another label that fits better for me? Okay, and so yeah, there's no sexual orientation that I would say nope, they couldn't be suffering from this type of OCD.
And well, go ahead, Zach, weigh in.
I completely agree with her. I mean, a big part of my story was reading that article from somebody that identified as gay. So, and that's what set me on my journey to recovery. So absolutely agree.
Yeah, and I'm so glad, like we were talking about this beforehand. I usually don't talk this much, but I haven't been on live in like 3 weeks, so I've just got a lot of pent up thoughts that may or may not be good. But we were talking beforehand, and there's been this term change from HOCD to SOCD, sexual orientation, and I really like that. And similar to Zach, when I became an advocate shortly after I gave the keynote speech in 2014, I met a gentleman who asked if he could talk to me, and we talked, and I knew what sexual orientation OCD was, or so I thought, right? And he said that he had come out to his family and his friends, and he switched churches because the church that he was at didn't accept him for who he was, and found a church and became very involved in that church, and sort of shifted and pivoted his life toward his values of who he was and his sexual identity. And then he was like, but I'm afraid I'm straight. What if I'm straight? I'm scared I'm straight, and I've ruined my life because I'm not really gay. I'm an imposter. I'm not. And I was like, I was like, at first I thought, this is such a rare subtype or symptom. I've never heard this before. And I was talking to some therapist friends and be like, have you seen this before? I mean, it's so common though. And it was so, when I first heard it, I was like, wow, I didn't even know that existed. And like, it's the reason I really like this conversation, and the fact that sexual orientation OCD opens that. It's not a one-way street. There's not a one direction to this. It's the fact that any orientation, OCD can latch onto your values. It latches on to the thing that you love the most, the thing that you don't want to lose. So it doesn't matter what direction you face, what orientation you're interested in. OCD can latch onto it and get sticky with it. And so, yeah, I completely agree with Judy. Go ahead, Judy.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit more to that. And I mentioned this earlier that sometimes people equate sexual orientation OCD, and certainly when it was called homosexuality OCD, to an underlying homophobia, that if I am this sexuality, it would be so bad because being that sexuality is so awful, right? And that's not necessarily the case. It could be a part of somebody's presentation, but again, sexual orientation OCD, it does not equate homophobia. Somebody could actually be very open and very, inclusive, I guess, and not have those fears. And the core fear there might be more about being inauthentic, wanting to make sure that you are the genuine person, and fears of social repercussions, and no matter in what direction it may be. And so the example that you shared, Ethan, this person had really put themselves out there to come out, and so that fear was more, well, now I have to go back and retract that, and what are people going to think, and am I not truly the authentic person that I thought I was? What if I'm ingenuine? And that's more the fear.
Thank you, Judy. Zach, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, just from my lived experience, I don't care what you identify as. Love who you love. I mean, that is not like, we should all love who we love and be who we are at our core. It was just, for me, I didn't identify that way, and so it felt like I was, in a sense, breaking my own heart, because I was dating somebody and I was in love with them, and I'm now marrying her in October, so very excited about that. But Dr. Judy talked about this. I mean, when it comes to intrusive thoughts, it's a fear. And the fear is what's causing the anxiety. And as soon as you create acceptance around that fear, and that it's okay, that fear goes away. And therefore that anxiety goes away. And what I found underneath that initial layer of anxiety was, I thought once I took care of the intrusive thoughts, I would no longer have anxiety. And I'm basically down to, I probably have those thoughts on a daily basis, but they don't stick anymore, because I'm just to a point where I don't care anymore. But what I did discover underneath that layer of anxiety was this anxiety around whether I was enough. And if I actually tracked back why the intrusive thought was causing so much fear, is it had way more to do with the ramifications of if I actually did identify as a different orientation, in the sense of having to leave my partner who I was in love with. And that deep abandonment drove down, when I've done the work over the last 5 years, boiled down to, am I enough? And that is what was underneath all of that, and that layer of anxiety I've been able to chip away at over time as well, because I've done the work to say I am enough and I'm okay with whoever I am, however I identify, all the other marks that we, identity markers that we have as human beings. And so I also think that kind of answers William's question in terms of if I were gay, my life would be ruined. I had that exact thought, but it wasn't in terms of being ruined because it's so wrong to be gay. No, that's not wrong at all. You are who you are. For me, it was my life would be ruined. I would have to leave my now fiance, who I'm about to marry, and that just it boiled down to my self-worth. So I know that's a bit of a rant, but I do want to talk on the different layers of fears that create the anxiety and really how you can work around that.
No, thank you, Zach. It's really important information, and definitely appreciate it. And I also apologize for looking away. It's a long story, but anyway, it's a cat fight, literally. So my cats are not getting along, and I took them to the vet. I don't mean to I feel weird looking off and people I don't know, but basically the cats went to the vet, and now one smells weird and one doesn't. They're sisters and they're not getting along and they're fighting, and it's freaking me out because I'm like a first-time cat dad and one is yelling at the other, and it's totally freaking me out. I'm fine though, really. This is a great opportunity to engage in opposite action and focus on my values, even though there's stuff going on in the background, right? We can make this analogous to OCD. Oh, it's so loud over there, but I'm just not going to pay attention. Anyway, so but I apologize to anyone that was like, what is Ethan doing? Because that's not a normal Ethan move. And sorry, Zach, I heard everything you said. I apologize for not giving you at least perceived eye contact while I check my email. Kidding. So I'm in rare form. I apologize. So Kenneth, yes, we did answer Kenneth's question. Okay. So
I can add a little bit more. Zach kind of went back to it, Judy, on William's clarification.
Yeah, that's where I was going next on William's question. Do we want to put William's question back up?
Yeah, great. Thank you, William, for clarifying too. I think I did have a good sense of it, but just wanted to be sure that I was understanding what you were saying. And so what I really picked up on from your question is could it be useful to challenge underlying homophobia to help with sexual orientation OCD? And I think that could be a part of it, right? There is a cognitive, certainly, portion to exposure and response prevention, right? Our treatment for OCD, in which we do look and see, okay, well, did that happen? Was it as bad as you predicted? What is the ultimate? What is the core fear? Let's talk about that, right? Certainly that can be. One caveat that I will add to that is that OCD is hard pressed to be convinced just by logic, right? And so we might be able to dispel, okay, but if you did come out as gay, that your life wouldn't be ruined. Look at all these people that would love you, right? And that little OCD birdie is still going to pop in and say, but what if they don't? But what if that therapist was wrong? Well, they just want to make you feel better, right? And that is where we are really careful with not feeding OCD with reassurance, because that is also a compulsion. That's a temporary relief, and in the long run, it's not really helping you face that fear. And so really what we do is just a bunch of maybes of maybe if you came out, your life would be ruined. We're not sure. Can we sit with that probably low probability, but possibility, right? And just choose where you would like to direct your attention. Do you want to spend your attention and your time trying to prevent any possibility that could happen, or can you just accept that that's a maybe?
And to tee off of what Judy is talking about, I think taking a play from acceptance commitment therapy here would be really effective, which is, part of what Judy's talking about is also the reason you're willing to sit with that uncertainty is how distracted are you from your values? How much energy and time are you putting in toward attaining certainty to feed OCD when really you're ignoring things that are really, really important to yourself, which is why ACT so beautifully fits with ERP, exposure response prevention, and OCD treatment in general, because it's kind of the next, and it's built into ERP as well, but it's this idea of maybe yes, maybe no, I'm not sure, but I'm not gonna try and find certainty because I can't. There's no certainty can be attained no matter how much OCD wants it or how much I'm going to try to apply logic to OCD being illogical. But at the end of the day, how much time am I willing to put in this versus how much time do I want to put into my values? And if I'm able to live into my values and it requires living with the possibility that this may or may not be true, then it's worth it. With the consistent hammering home of this idea that those thoughts will get better, they will dwindle down, right? It's like, it's hard because when you first engage in treatment, anxiety spikes, OCD spikes, and it should. We're challenging it, we're challenging you. I was challenged, Zach was challenged, right? And you can't punch OCD in the face unless it's close. You got to get it close so you can punch it in the face. Which is why we don't want to sort of base how therapy is going on feelings initially, because we're very feeling driven. Oh, well, I don't feel good, so this must not be working. If we make it about feelings, then it's not going to go well. It's about like our actions. The feelings come later. But yeah, it's this whole idea of, what are we willing to sit with? What level of discomfort are we willing to sit with? And most importantly, why? Why? What are we losing? What are we missing? What are we not getting out of our lives? And for me, I can tell you, in my darkest times when I was really struggling and we all had sort of our rock bottoms. The thing that really helped me through that, and this is true for regardless of your subtype or symptom, it was this idea of being very specific on what I was missing if I chose to compulsion, chose OCD. I didn't understand when therapists said to me, you got to fight your OCD. You got to fight your OCD. I'm like, I don't know what that means. That's too ambiguous. Like, I don't know what fight your OCD means. But when I worked with the therapist who said, you're actively choosing not to date the girl that you like and, whatever her name was at the time, you're actively choosing not to go on that audition that you really want to go on at the time I was acting, right? And made it so specific to you're choosing OCD or you're not choosing this very specific thing. And once I started to specify the things I wasn't choosing, it seemed so completely counterintuitive to my values and the way I wanted to live, because I now had specifics. Instead of, oh God, I really want to check or I really want to review, it was, well, I must not really want to live. I must not really want to do this thing that I really want to do. And when I got to the fork in the road and got to a place where I had to choose, suddenly the choices became easier because I knew what I was choosing and I knew why I was choosing them. And it was clear for me. And so for me, that was a huge help, is really breaking down into specifics. And the other side of that is also like, here's the great paradox. The great paradox of OCD is that, and I don't think I stole this from anybody, I think this is mine, is that OCD is all about accepting uncertainty. It's all about accepting uncertainty and all about the lessons of you're not going to find certainty around what your OCD worries about. The paradigm shift is that if you choose OCD, you will certainly not have a life. That is certain. If you choose OCD and you choose to compulse, then your world will get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And there is certainty around that. And that's so weird that like the one place that there's certainty is that, yeah, if you give into OCD, you're giving up your life, whatever that looks like. So when I made that realization, suddenly it was like, you know what? Let's gamble. Let's gamble, because it's a dead end, this path. And this way I might have a chance, whatever that looks like. Let me give that a shot. So, all right, that's my rant. So William, I hope that that insight from Judy really helped sort of tease out what you were thinking and what you were asking. As always, also, I just want to continue to, and Shaitana, I see your question. Thank you, Selwyn. It is a dark blue, but I appreciate the, and thank you, Armando, for the kind words. I'm on my best behavior because, again, I haven't done this in a minute. So it'll degrade over the weeks and I'll be back to my usual self shortly. Please feel free to ask questions. We are here for you. And we all have lived experience with OCD. Dr. Judy is a professional clinician. So even if your questions don't necessarily revolve around sexual orientation, OCD, we are here to support you and here to answer questions. So feel free to ask along any lines. We're always happy to answer. At 7:36 p.m., Shaitana wrote, is a lot of OCD similar to imposter syndrome? I'll let Dr. Judy sort of separate that and answer that for you, and then we can maybe go in a little deeper.
Okay, I'm thinking on that one. I hadn't put the two together necessarily, but I can see why it would be a part of it. I wouldn't classify OCD as like, oh, this is a function of imposter syndrome, which I know that's not what you're saying, but could it be similar? Sure. It's conspiracy theories about yourself, right? Is there something that I'm missing? The shoe's going to drop at some point. Well, certainly people are going to figure me out, or I'm going to figure me out, and everything's going to change and be totally different, right? It's OCD again goes a lot back to doubt and wanting that certainty. And of course, in imposter syndrome, doubt is a big part of it. Am I actually who I am acting as I am? So I could see the similarities. I'll think on that a little bit more about how that would be similar. And really what I've said in imposter syndrome generally, and Ethan, I'll say that I'm a big ACT lover, is in the vein of ACT is saying, okay, well, maybe that's true. Maybe you're a total fake and people are going to find out at some point. You get to decide what you do with that thought. What is your behavior going to be? Can you keep that note in your pocket of I'm a total fake and I'm just pretending to be this person and still do the thing that you want to do that job, audition for that role, whatever it may be? Because what's the alternative? You just count yourself out on the small chance that maybe you are an imposter? That's not a life.
Go ahead, Zach.
Dr. Judy nailed that. That was awesome. I mean, one of the most foundational principles, tools, whatever you want to call it, I learned was the acceptance. And that's what Dr. Judy talked about. And it can apply, like Ethan, you brought up like the audition and all these other factors. Like at any given moment, like anybody could be fired from their job. At any given moment, you could be incompetent at the career path that you've chosen, or not be the person that you say you are, or think that you are. And those are doubts and fears. It's what it boils down to between the two. So I completely agree with Dr. Judy. And the only way to combat that is with cultivating acceptance around uncertainty and then choosing actions based on your values, which is something that Ethan was talking about. And outside of that, you're trying to create control, because that's what the human mind wants to do. And it's the irony of it. The harder you grasp for control, the more that you lose that sense of control. So yeah, I would echo that.
And I agree with Zach and Judy. I think imposter, whether it's syndrome or not, definitely exists well within this world of OCD. I've from a most basic standpoint, where I became an advocate, but wait, I'm struggling. Can I be an advocate and struggle? I must not be a good advocate. Oh my God, I'm posing as an advocate because I'm really struggling. Am I an imposter, right? Then there's this idea of like, people can't know I have a mental illness, so I'm going to fake my whole life. And even though it's not specific to my OCD, it's, well, let me pretend everything is going well, but it's not. I'm a total fake and fraud, because inside I'm a disaster, but outside, like, hey, everything's great, love life, woo, right? But then recently I've been talking to somebody pretty regularly, and this really ties into what Zach and Judy said, which is, I have a friend and their OCD really revolves around this idea that they've committed a murder. They've killed someone. That someone did pass for other reasons, but they're afraid that they did it. They're the cause. They were the murderer, right? And they struggle all the time with this idea of they're in a very impressionable role, teaching kids and spirituality and like someone to look up to, and they're like, well, how can I even do this when I may have murdered somebody, right? How can I even be like, I'm just this, I don't deserve any of this because I'm this horrible, terrible person. And so there is a lot of feelings of imposter in there. But I also tell them, number one, like, it's OCD. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. Let's just work with this idea that, okay, that may or may not have happened, but what can you do moving forward? Do you want to go to turn yourself in? And if you don't want to go to jail, then just let's focus on what you're going to do moving forward and making the best of your life and living with that discomfort that you may or may not have done it, and the imposter whatever it is, a syndrome or an experience or a feeling that comes with it. But also an interesting thing came to mind, which was there's people in jail that have committed murder that are doing meaningful things, that are redeeming themselves in whatever they feel they are, whether they're getting law degrees, whether they're holding support groups in jail for other people that are trying to get off substances or whatever, and while that may not excuse their actions, for them, they're leading value-driven lives beyond that choice. And so I kind of brought that up to them, and I was like, if they can, why can't you too? Why can't we live with this uncertainty? But then, you have the whole rest of your life to make some really good decisions. Hey, great, you made a bad decision. You accidentally killed someone. We don't know for sure. It's a terrible decision if you did it, but we'll assume you didn't, and now go do some good stuff. So I totally relate to this idea of this imposter being in there in a number of different ways. And I think that's very normal and natural. And I also think lots of people, you don't need OCD to feel like an imposter. Social media does a good job of making you feel pretty, having a variety of different feelings. I don't know if Judy or Zach have additional thoughts on that.
Zach, go ahead. Okay, I'm up.
You're the doctor. Go.
Oh gosh, by title only. Maybe I'm an imposter. Check my credentials. One thing that I'm gonna pick on, Ethan, that you said, or pick up on, not pick on you. I like what you said, is that highlighting that. I know. Well, here's where you're wrong, Ethan.
It's okay. I haven't.
No. One thing that story made me think of is that, remember that OCD, not always, but often picks on the things that you value most, the things that you really care about. And in the context of sexual orientation OCD, if you really care about, for example, a relationship that you're in, OCD will be like, oh, here's a threat. And that's why you grab that thought. And that's why you say, well, I need to figure that out, because the risk of that actually happening is so great that I can't live with that uncertainty. And so in the example you were giving, Ethan, with somebody with harm OCD, it sounds like they really value working with children and being a safe, good person. And so OCD is like, well, knock, knock, hello, are you sure? Because did you commit a murder? Right? And so it can really cling to, it's just really brutal in that way, that it can cling to the things that you care about the most.
Go ahead, Zach.
And again, this is just from my own personal experience. One correlation is, I think it's a very common thought pattern to call yourself a monster and these types of words towards yourself. But actually, one thing that I realized, and it's actually something that I think we talk a little bit about in the OCD community, but I think it's beneficial to talk about it a little bit more, is that the words that we use matter. And so I'll use that same example with the kids. So for me, what being around young kids eventually translated into was pedophile OCD. And I was saying, this is terrible. I'm a horrible human being. I'm a monster. This is the worst possible thing that any human being on the face of the planet could do. Very heavy words, very negative words, very demeaning words. And so I've actually, at my darkest point, I was the thoughts that were causing the depression, the suicidal thoughts, was actually pedophile OCD. And so I was doing exposure and response prevention, and something that I discovered along the way, and I don't have any empirical data, any scientific data to back this up, was I started changing the way that I spoke to myself. I stopped using words like terrible, horrible, horrific, worst thing ever. I still used the uncertainty tool, but I also took it a step further and changed the words. And the best way I can describe it is like rounding out the edges of a table. It made things less sharp. And I think that by changing my wording, it did take my relationship with any genre of thoughts that I've had since that point to a deeper level. And I've just noticed that that's been really beneficial.
Thank you, Zach. Appreciate that. Actually, I just saw Amy Mariskin said, hi, Katie, Nashville OCD and Anxiety Treatment Center represent. Okay, that's it. Moving on. Let's go back up to Kenneth. Kenneth, thank you so much for being patient. At 7:28 p.m., Kenneth wrote, can SOCD distort your attraction to the opposite sex, i.e. private parts? So we now know that that actually, you know what? I don't need to. Zach outnodded Judy for this one, so we'll go with Zach first.
Absolutely. I did not have any sex drive for a while, which fed the thoughts that the belief system that maybe I had switched, and it at times kind of felt like a force with my now fiance, and I think that fed it even worse. But yeah, I mean, there for a while I had no sex drive at all. But I think that the depression was feeding a large part of that.
Yeah, go ahead, Judy.
Yeah, so it's another one of those things that's like, gosh, OCD, you're trying to prevent this thing so extensively that you're actually backed your way into the thing that you're afraid of, right? By doing all these compulsions and supposedly trying to protect me, and yet here we are because of you, right? And so not saying that it actually changes your sexual orientation, because it doesn't, but what it does do is it pairs interactions with somebody that you are sexually attracted to with anxiety, because you're having all these doubts, right? And you're doing all this checking of like, well, is this, I don't know, am I right? Am I being not genuine in this situation? And it pairs any content, whether sexual or not, with the gender that you are not attracted to, with hyper focus on physical sensations, which by hyper focusing on physical sensations, you can actually bring them about. And so you may actually experience some arousal just because you're checking in to, well, what is that area of what is my groin doing right now, right? And then you start noticing, well, maybe it's doing a little something, right? And so it pairs the interactions that you are actually sexually attracted to with anxiety, and the ones that you are really afraid of with a groinal response. And so it can flip it. Again, that doesn't change your sexual orientation, but in terms of how your body responds in those situations, it certainly can. And when you're feeling really anxious about a sexual interaction, that makes it harder to perform or makes you less interested. And so it can add on to that doubt, as Zach was saying.
That's a great follow-up. Zach, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, I mean, that's exactly what happened. Exactly what happened.
So yeah, Kenneth, I hope that that helped answer that question. And so, no, you're definitely not alone in that, for sure. If we scroll down, and as always, if you're on, I want to encourage you to continue to ask questions regarding sexual orientation, OCD, or otherwise. We are here to have a conversation around anything, and here to support you in any way that we can. Shiatana wrote, is at 7:36 p.m. is a lot of OCD. Oh no, sorry, I'm reading. It is Shiatana. Wrong question. Right person. Here we go. 7:51 p.m. How are you supposed to accept harm OCD? It's terrifying. This is a great question. I realize that we're a guest short tonight, so I'm giving myself permission to speak a little bit. But this is a great question, and I'm curious to Zach and Judy's thoughts as well. But I will say this, my OCD, when I got really, really sick, and I was sick for 30 years, but when I was completely unable to function, my OCD shifted to self-harm. And I would, as I went through my various treatment modalities and places of treatment, whether they were clinic or residential, or if you know my story, you don't know my story, but I went through some places. And as I experienced group therapies and different individuals, I really set myself apart from everyone else. And I think people with OCD do that to a certain extent. My OCD was special. My OCD was more dangerous. I was pretty certain that I might harm myself. What if I hurt myself? What if I accidentally hurt myself? What if I want to hurt myself? And frankly, who cares about all of your OCD, because mine is death, right? So like, you're afraid of what? A germ? Who cares? Like, I'm going to die. So like, mine is not yours, and mine is way more important, and it's scarier because it's life or death. And unfortunately, that's one of the worst things we can do to ourselves is really place our OCD. And we don't do it on purpose. I'm in no way saying that you're going around going, my OCD is worse than yours, but we don't want to put so much weight on our own OCD. The reality is, it's all uncomfortable, and the distress is just as bad for everyone, regardless of subtype or symptom, whether it's hand washing, whether it's sexual orientation OCD, harm, self-harm, religious group. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's all just unbelievably painful, lonely, stigmatizing, all the words that associate with that. So the reality is, the question you have to ask yourself is not necessarily how are you supposed to accept harm OCD. The question is, in this case, I'd possibly remove the harm away from that. It's like, how are you to accept OCD? Well, skills, tools, treatment. That's the answer. Just like any other disease or disorder, their thoughts, and those thoughts have feelings and emotions associated with them that are really, really uncomfortable. But the good news is OCD is one of the most treatable mental illnesses. And we have really, really good treatment for it. So for me, and I'll go back to something that I said before, I was to a place where if I didn't get up and help myself, I was going to die, like really die. And I was put in that position after 10, 12 months of really intense treatment and therapy. It was an educated choice by therapists to put me in that position. But the bottom line is that I got to a point, they put me in a position where I had to choose life, where life became more important than OCD, and had to, because otherwise I could just continue to indulge the OCD. So suddenly the fear of accidentally hurting myself paled in comparison to the reality of actually dying, because I didn't want to die, because typically you don't want to do what your OCD wants you to do. It attacks the things that you love the most. Apparently I'm really selfish and love myself. That's what I learned. My greatest value is me. But in all seriousness, it was this aha moment where I went, OCD is telling me that I think I want to hurt myself. What if I hurt myself? What if I die? And if I choose life, I think I'm going to get hurt, but I don't know for sure. So in that direction, there's a fire, but I might get through the fire and I may be singed a little bit, but I may make it on the other side. And in that direction, if I just keep listening to OCD and compulsing, there's no through. It's just the end. And that for me, unfortunately, it got to that point where it got so severe, it had to come to a life or death situation to make me see what Zach and Judy talked about, which was to let the possibility of my biggest fear coming true be there so I can move forward with my life. And so it's a long-winded answer of saying, you don't have to accept it. It's a choice, but I would imagine that you have some pretty amazing things to offer yourself and the world. And so, I would say that I would choose to accept harm OCD because it's OCD. But I would say the caveat to that is, I don't know if you're in treatment, if you're in therapy, if you get support, but you need support, you need tools, you need skills to be able to learn how to accept it. Judy, please weigh in.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, we touched on it earlier that so much of OCD can come with shame, with a lot of different subtypes of OCD, right? And I see what you're saying, Shatana, with like, well, how? Like, this is, in my mind, the worst possible thing. How could I possibly accept this? And what I would challenge that with is that it sounds like you're conflating the thought of potentially being dangerous with actually being dangerous, right? You can accept the thought that there's a doubt, and what I would really refer back to is back to ACT and saying, okay, there's a possibility. And are these compulsions what I would like to spend my time on to try to eliminate any possibility that I could potentially be dangerous or have harmed someone, right? Are these compulsions, are they working? And are they really worth my time? And going back to what is it that I value, and am I going to choose to do these compulsions in relation to my OCD, or am I going to choose something else and just accept that maybe I don't know if I'm dangerous.
I love that, Judy. Go ahead, Zach.
I mean, I don't really have much more to add, because it's the same formula every single time. You just eventually have to get, I mean, I don't know if it was Ethan or Dr. Judy that said this, but you eventually just have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and sit in that and develop the skill of acceptance. And the best tool in conjunction with ERP that I found is mindfulness and meditation. Because when I still meditate every single day, but early on, I was sitting with my intrusive thoughts and developing the skill set of sitting with a thought and letting it pass like a cloud in the sky, not latching onto it, not needing to do anything with it. If I compulsed, meeting that, because I was doing internal compulsions, meeting that with acceptance, and just learning to put distance between my thoughts and myself, and realizing that I'm not my thoughts, I'm not my feelings. So it's the same formula over and over again, which I think is a really empowering belief to have. And it's something that Ethan said, but yeah, OCD is one of the most treatable brain disorders. And I think that's a great thing. You have the tools. The individual is empowered because after a while, I didn't even need to go see Dr. Irene. I was just doing ERP on my own because I knew what to do.
Yeah, that's the goal, right? To be our own therapists. And I mean, to Judy's point, ACT is so powerful because no matter what the question is like, well, this time it's real, or what if it is real this time, or this is different. It's like, guess what all those are? They're thoughts. They're always thoughts. And that's what's powerful, is like, just when you think it's something new, guess what? That's a thought too. And as long as thoughts aren't facts and feelings aren't facts, we can always go back to the idea that, well, it's just a thought. And now I'm not in any way invalidating people's thoughts or making it seem like thoughts are no big deal. Thoughts are terrifying. And they can be, but it's wonderful to be able to come back to this thought. And I've said this before, I love this idea of, we won't do this exercise because I want to get to other questions, but one time I was told to close my eyes really hard and think I'm a banana and turn myself into a banana. And I sat there for a while and I just couldn't turn myself into a banana. And I kind of now, when I have OCD thoughts, they're just kind of replaced with you're a banana, which is the same thing. It's still a thought. The context may be different, but it's a thought. It's a thought. Thinking I'm a banana is not going to turn me into a banana, although I do have great appeal. But that's besides the point. Sorry, I set myself up on that joke. But regardless, like, just hang with that a little bit. These ideas that they're thoughts. And just when you think, nope, I got something else to throw at my therapist, that's a thought too. Barbara asked, 10:58 p.m., have you talked about the influence of male-female hormonal imbalance and in RE2 SO, and ruminating on the what ifs of opposite sex attraction? I'll throw that to Judy.
Yeah, so the research on sexual orientation OCD is still pretty new. There are some people doing some really great work, but we just don't have a ton yet. And so I haven't seen this. That doesn't mean that's not out there. It may be out there. I haven't seen it. One thing that I would say in response to that, though, is, are we again confusing sexual orientation OCD with actual sexual orientation? SOCD is not indicative of any way with your actual sexual orientation, right? And so could it be that the hormonal imbalance does affect OCD in some way generally? Yeah, but not your sexual orientation, right? The other thing that I will say about that, or not sexual orientation OCD. The other thing that I would say about that is that accepting that sexuality is a spectrum is often a big part of sexual orientation OCD as well. And so again, OCD loves to overcategorize. It wants this or that and nothing in between, 0 or 100, right? And so a lot of times it's accepting that sexuality is a spectrum, and you might be, most of us are somewhere in the middle. We're not completely 100, we're not completely 0. It might be 99, might be 95, somebody might be 65, right? But it's somewhere in the middle. And so I think that that's a big part of stopping that rumination too, is just saying, okay, but maybe, can you just sit with the maybe? Which is what I always go back to, what I've gone back to in this town hall, because it's what I always go back to in therapy too. Can we sit with a maybe?
Thank you, Judy. Keep going with the questions. Barbara wrote, Ethan's story is so encouraging. Thank you so much, Barbara. Appreciate that. Eric wrote, not a question, just a comment. When I was single, I had this form of OCD. Now that I'm in a 3-year relationship, it's been replaced by ROCD, relationship OCD. OCD attacks what's important to you at the time. And that is so true. Thank you for that. At 8:06 p.m., Leo wrote, how do you know if it's OCD or genuine questioning? Which is some of the things that we talked about beforehand and stuff. How do you tease it out? I'll start with Judy.
Okay. I'll start with talking about, these are terms that we don't necessarily need to get real deep into, but egosyntonic versus ego-dystonic thoughts. Is the thought pleasurable to you, or is it distressing to you? And so if you imagine yourself with somebody of that sex that you are having some thoughts about, is that enjoyable to have that thought, or is that very distressing to you? And that's a way to tease out.
Zach.
I mean, that was the filter system that I was introduced to and that I'm familiar with as well. It's a pretty clear distinction between, well, at least for me, when something was distressing and when something wasn't.
Yeah, I agree. And that's not to say that OCD then won't nitpick that and then, try to cast doubt on that decision and that determination. But at that point, you have to sort of, take a leap of faith. We can also, I was going to dive into some dialectical behavioral therapy and mindfulness and talk about wise mind, which, but there's other ways that through self-examination that is not compulsive, you can also help tease yourself out. But
Ethan, could I mention something real quick?
No, just be quiet, Zach. Anyway, so no,
put yourself on mute for the rest of the panel.
No, go ahead, please.
What I was gonna say though is when you do start ERP and you start to become more comfortable with the set of the genre of thoughts that you're having, one way that OCD likes to sneak its way back in there is by playing I don't have like the pounding heart through the chest now anymore towards these thoughts. It must mean that this is actually coming true. So I do think that that's something worth pointing out, that actually when the therapy is working, it's like OCD wants to cling on to that fear, that anxiety, and find any way to just, again, keep you locked in, make your world smaller and smaller and smaller. And so I do think that that's worth pointing out to Leo as well as he starts to do that therapy.
Zach and Eric, don't worry, I've got your question coming up next. Zach, did you see Leo's last question at 12 p.m. or additional thought to that? Maybe you want to continue to weigh in a little bit.
I'm not a clinician, so I don't use technical terms. For me, like, I don't know if I had internalized homophobia or not. I just knew that for me, it personally wasn't the way that I identified. And that was what was distressing to me. I didn't think that it was wrong to be like, be a man attracted to another man, a woman attracted to another woman. I think people are the way that they are, and that is completely fine. For me, I just personally didn't identify that way. And that was what was distressing. So I don't know if that answers the question for you, Leo, but I think underlying this, because I have a lot of people, I have people from Brazil, New Zealand, Mexico, India, Australia, or I don't know if I already said Australia, but Australia, Europe, reach out to me, and it's the same 4 or 5 questions, and you're hitting them all in terms of just the pattern of thought that we have to get through until, at the end of the day, just tapping back into sitting with that uncertainty. But
yeah, because it's not, oh, I have a problem with that lifestyle. I have a problem with individuals that are like that. It's distressing because it's not in accordance with your own values. It's concerning because it's deep down, that's not who you are or the way you want to live. And it's like, well, wait, why do I want to do something against the way I genuinely feel? It has actually nothing to do, as Zach said, with homophobia or any type of disagreement, not the word I was looking for, but not agreeing with being gay or being straight or being queer or anything around that. I don't know, Judy, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I will say too, and even as I was responding to that question, I'm like, it doesn't maybe it's not always that completely clear for everybody, because if somebody really is, let's say, for example, gay, but they do have internalized homophobia, I think as Leo was saying, that thought could be distressing, right? But maybe the distressing part is what is my social circle going to say about this? Am I going to be shunned by a community, by my family, by friends? And maybe it's more towards that. There are specific measures for internalized homophobia that can assess that. And I think that it really is a case-by-case basis and something to talk through with your therapist. What I don't really want to recommend, honestly, is testing, because that can be a checking compulsion too. And so I think, talking with an individual therapist about what that means to you and what the fear truly is how you can best disentangle it if it's not quite as clear cut for you that, like, this is an upsetting thought, this is a pleasurable thought.
Absolutely. And Leo, at the end of the day, this work is best done with a clinician who knows what they're doing, and they can give you exposures and response prevention around this. Typically anything testing on your own is most likely a compulsion, and it will just continue to feed the monster in general. Shiatana, we will have a conversation on Wise Mind for sure. And I'll if there's time, I'll quickly go into it. So Eric wrote, it's 8:07 p.m. What if the thoughts are blasphemous thoughts? And then he went in to leave a couple other comments, which I'll just quickly read. It's painful to have blasphemous thoughts when you love God and your faith. It's just hard to ignore them. This is a great lead-in actually to some things we have going on, but I'll let Judy or Zach, who wants to weigh in first? Doctor.
I'm on. Yeah, this is a tough one. And I think, there's other resources with IOCDF too that talk about, religiosity and how that can be a struggle with what we call thought action fusion, which is this belief that something that you think is just as bad as if you have done it, or if you think it means that you are more likely to do it, right? Which in some religious teachings, that message is sometimes sent, that your thoughts are good or your thoughts are bad, right? And so one thing that I really like that I stole from, I believe, Dr. Jonathan Grayson, is asking yourself, am I praying to God or am I praying to the OC demon? Am I doing this because this is something that is enriching, that I really value, that I care about, or am I just trying to get relief? Is this a compulsion, right? Which is feeding the OC demon. And again, looking at the function of the behavior, it doesn't have to be just one or the other. I think I would, if somebody I was working with and this has happened, comes to me with this fear or this thought, I would try to disentangle a bit that your thoughts are not actions. Thoughts can be neutral in valence. They're not good or bad. They're sensations that occur in your mind. You can both absolutely love God and have a faith and have blasphemous thoughts. And actually, likely that's coming up because you care so much about your faith, right? Remember that OCD picks up on what you care about. So that's what direction I would take that. But I do understand that is really distressing experience to have.
Thank you, Judy. Zach.
I haven't struggled with this genre of thoughts. I guess the only thing that I would point to is Eric's clearly a religious man, and probably believes that God created man, God created the earth, which means that God created him, God created his brain, and I don't think that God would have created anything, in his creation, Eric, that would. But again, I don't want to get too logical. It's just my perspective. Just wouldn't create anything to deliberately make you a sinner. So that's, again, I have never had that genre of thoughts, but just something to think about, that God probably wouldn't put you in that situation.
So Eric, I definitely have some thoughts, and I also have some resources. I promise I'm not teeing up your situation. So first of all, I think it's important to note, number one, that unfortunately, we can't control our thoughts and we can't control our feelings. Those are the two things. And we have really little control over most things. Control is pretty much an illusion. We have control over our focus and our behavior. That's just about it. We seek control because it's certainty and it makes us feel more comfortable. But at the end of the day, thoughts are involuntary and feelings are involuntary. It doesn't mean that we can't focus our thoughts, but if I kind of tune into my head, I notice all kinds of things floating around in there. I got fried chicken right now. I thought of a Buick. I don't know, just things are happening, right? And so I think it's important to recognize that because we can't control our thoughts, and I'm not trying to reassure you, I'm simply saying that thoughts are thoughts, right? But it's how we focus and how we behave in accordance with those and how we react and respond. The other thing is to say is that, with religious scrupulosity and things around this nature, it's really important. First of all, there is treatment. It's the same as everyone else's, is exposure response prevention. And you should find a good therapist, but you can have successful exposure response prevention and live toward your faith and values at the same time. It's so important to get that message across, that that is absolutely a reality. And I'll go further to say that there's a lot of stigma around it in religious communities, these beliefs of what thoughts are and pray it away, both not only religious faith communities, but diverse communities as well, right? So it's important to continue to push this message that faith and mental health do not have to be mutually exclusive. In fact, they shouldn't be mutually exclusive. Good mental health, good treatment will actually allow you to be a more devout man of faith, that you can devote so much of your mind to what's important to you in your own religion, not necessarily to OCD thoughts and fears and replaying and rewinding and what ifs and all that stuff. And it's such an important realization to make, is like the goal here isn't to be blasphemous. The goal is to push OCD to the side so I can live in accordance with my values. And if my values are being a deeply religious and spiritual person, an individual, then that's why I'm going to engage in treatment and therapy. And it's important to find a good therapist that can do that. And so with that, and we'll give out an email address at the end. So if you guys have questions or seeking resources or anything like that, please don't hesitate to reach out. I can think of 2 or 3 excellent therapists offhand that are really phenomenal with religious scrupulosity. And similar of those thoughts. But it's important to say that we actually have our inaugural Faith and Mental Health Conference coming up at the end of May. It is completely free. It is a one-day conference. I want to let everybody talk. We're running out of answers. We're running out of time. We'll put up the information at the end, but it's free to sign up. It's for faith leaders. It's for individuals with OCD or any mental illness. It's for the entire community. It's an amazing day of programming. Again, as I mentioned, it's completely free. And so we think this conversation of faith and mental health is extremely important at the IOCDF, and it's one that we really want to continue to have and get out there, because we know there's a giant gap. We know there's a lot of stigmatization going on, in the church, in the synagogue, in the mosque, whatever the religious affiliation is. We know that there's a disconnect in a lot of the places, and we really want to create education around that. So faith should not be a barrier to treatment. Kenneth, well, real quick, Barbara wrote, Zach, yes, answers says exactly. I'm walking through with a young college gal, knows she's female, wants to date and marry male, but having thoughts of opposite SO. She's always looked and dressed butch. So I think that was in reference to a former comment that you were making. Kenneth quickly wrote, we have time for one more. And incidentally, Fran just put the link to that event. So please feel free to click on that link and sign up. Did I mention it's free? You should definitely attend. It's going to be amazing. I'm excited. And Barbara wrote, agree, faith communities, mental health gap. The gal is a professional Christian, professing Christian. So that's a big issue too. Absolutely. Kenneth, how do you not let SOCD inhibit your ability to initiate romantic relationships? I have OCD and social anxiety disorder, which are debilitating to the point that it is hard to initiate relationships. Judy.
That is really hard. And I feel for you. Social anxiety disorder is, really tough to deal with too, and especially when we're talking about initiating relationships. I would say that if you're not already working with a therapist and you do have access to one, that would be my first recommendation. That go to the IOCDF website and search the resources. There are really great resources there, including one like the No OCD app, things like that. So if you're not working with a therapist already, I would really recommend that. I would say if you do not have access, or if you're not feeling ready for that right now, it would be challenging yourself in small ways. You can start to do small exposures for yourself. Call up a restaurant, ask what time it is, and hang up, or tell them a quick joke. Do something that you would think might be, that your social anxiety might tell you is weird, and practice that, right? To get yourself to a point where you could be comfortable with initiating a relationship. In terms of SOCD, I would say the principle of allowing yourself the space to just have that thought and carry it with you and still behave in accordance with your values could be helpful, right? Carrying that thought with you and not, again, placing a valence on it of this is a good thought, this is a bad thought. If I have that thought, I can't possibly be around other people, and just saying that's just a thought that I'm having and I get to choose how I engage with that and how I behave.
Thank you, Judy. Zach.
I mean, Dr. Judy pretty much nailed it. I think the only thing that I would add is, you know, and when I say take action, despite maybe what you're feeling, I'll take it from the social anxiety point of view and habituation. And this is the same thing that happens with ERP around intrusive thoughts and Dr. Judy talked about, obviously incrementally exposing yourself to things that scare you or cause, fear, which creates the anxiety. And eventually you just habituate to those types of things. Also, if you have a fear of maybe doing something silly in public, and Dr. Judy touched on this, go in public and do something a little silly, like push back on it a little bit. You know what I mean? Now I would recommend do that, talk to a Dr. Judy, talk to a therapist about what that looks like. I'm just somebody with a lived experience. I'm just going to continue to repeat that. But yeah, I mean, I think the ultimate goal is habituation and just basically developing this mentality that no matter what your thoughts are, they don't have to dictate what you do, the behaviors that you take, and then just acting on your values.
Thank you, Zach. And I think the last thing I'll add, Kenneth, and I say this with the greatest compassion, and I don't know your exact situation, so but I think it's really important to dig deep and ask yourself, if you're ready for a relationship right now. I really would like individuals to not negotiate with OCD. It's such easy to negotiate with OCD and sort of it's sort of a, I want my cake and eat it too disorder where it's so scary to fight it. It's like, well, I'm just going to do the best I can with it. And that's okay sometimes. There's no judgment here whatsoever. If you have access to treatment, if you currently are in treatment, I would talk to your therapist about whether they think that it's a good idea to engage in a relationship right now. When you say the word debilitating, that raises a red flag for me. Because debilitating is a very strong word, right? When I was debilitated, I was unable to function. If you're not able to access treatment, because also we have to recognize that there's so many barriers to treatment, and that's unfortunate, and that's why we're on here doing what we do, right? If there are barriers to treatment, then I agree, Judy, Zach, and everything, like do what you can to chip away at it. She's mentioned Dr. Grayson a lot. For anybody watching that doesn't have access to treatment, his book, Freedom from OCD, is probably the best book on ERP out there. Fran will put a link to that book in the comments. And there's some other also, Kenneth, when we give out our email, please feel free to email us because we can definitely give you other resources as well. But I would do a gut check and say, am I ready to get in a relationship? And do I want to be in a relationship where OCD is dictating so much? And it's not about waiting for the exact right time, because those of us with OCD will literally wait forever until it feels like the exact right time. But it is okay to decide you want to be in a certain level of maintenance and management with OCD before moving into certain aspects of your life. And that's a conversation for you and your therapist or whatever, but it's just worth saying that don't settle, and with that, it looks like we are out of time. Hey, Thomas, good to see you, my friend. Yes. So first of all, I just want to thank Dr. Judy and Zach for joining us today. Thank you so much for being here. Any last thoughts, Judy?
No, thank you for having us. I appreciate it. I think it's a really important conversation, and so I'm glad that we were able to chat about it.
Thank you so much, Judy. Zach, any final thoughts?
Just that whatever you're going through right now, you're not alone. There's a whole community of us here, and we want to support you. So reach out and get the support and the help that you need.
Absolutely. So if we didn't get to your questions, if you have additional comments or suggestions, whether it's topic questions, we'll put the email up first because I see some stuff in the thread. So info@iocdf.org. Please don't hesitate to email us. If you have a specific question for Zach or Dr. Judy, just let us know in the email that you'd like the question directed at Zach or Judy. We'll make sure that they get the question and they'll answer back. And we'll make sure you get the answer back. Also, I usually don't, but for this particular town hall, I'll also give out my email address, which is just, I don't know if you have it queued up. It's okay if you don't, Fran, but it's just Ethan. Yeah, okay. It's just Ethan at iocdf.org. I normally only give it out during the Just Ethan, but there's a lot of intense questions and comments. I answer this email directly. Give me a few days. I'm caught up, but give me a few days, but I will always get back to you. So if you're a little nervous to email the broad general mailbox, please feel free to email me directly, and I can also pass your questions along too. Thank you also so much for your comments, your support. I love watching advocacy happen in the comment thread because everyone supports everyone, and thank you for being candid and honest and sincere and vulnerable. It's really, really appreciated. Stick with me. Just some quick end housekeeping notes. As always, I want to thank the IOCDF and thank Fran behind the scenes for what I got to change this line. I've been saying digital voodoo for like 2 years. I really need to do something different with that. For all upcoming virtual streams and content, visit iocdf.org/peace of mind. There it is right there. Some quick announcements. We love announcements. Stop hissing at her. She loves you. She's your sister. Sorry. This is so upsetting. All right. Anyway, I can get through the rest of this. I can. Some quick announcements. Next week, April 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern, will be an episode of Just Ethan. It will not be Just Ethan. I will be having Tom Smalley on. Tom is amazing. He's been on that show before, but he's also a lead advocate. He's got a new initiative coming out with a new series of town hall on anxiety in athletes. He's an incredible story. Sorry, they're like freaking out and arguing. This is so weird. Be good to your sister. Stop it. Okay. I apologize. He's an incredible guy. Tune in. Wednesday, 4/21. We have a new series hosted by Katie O'Dunn, Faith and OCD. This is leading up into the conference with guests Micah Howe, Valerie Andrews, and Jed Siev. So Eric, that on Wednesday, mark your calendar, Faith and OCD. You've got some really, really good, knowledgeable guests on there. Also some clergy and religious leaders as well as lived experience. So that will be a great opportunity to maybe ask some additional questions and get some insight. We talked about the Faith and Mental Health Conference. Fran, if you want to put that title up on there, we can quickly show that real quick and give information. So if you want to register for our registration is open now. Faith and Mental Health Conference will bring together a diverse group of faith leaders, therapists, and those with lived experience for a one-day event on May 21st from 1 to 5 p.m. As I said, registration is free, and feel free to go to that website. Lastly, Fran will put them in the comment thread. We have 2 surveys. We could really, really use your help. Super easy way to advocate. One is anxiety in athletes. Again, I spoke to Tom. This is regarding him, as well as anxiety in faith-based communities. Check out these links. Fran will put the athletes first, and then he will put up the monkey for, yes, faith-based anxieties. If you wouldn't mind taking the time, we'd really, really appreciate it. All this content is for you. We want to know what you're feeling, thinking, so we can create content that's meaningful and important to you. If you haven't already, want to be notified about all the programming the ICF is doing over the next month, be sure to subscribe and follow on Facebook and YouTube. We are also live on that other one, Fran, Twitch. Thank you. Wow, a little slow on the uptake there. We are also live on Twitch. So with all of that, I want to thank Judy again and Zach for being here. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you. Have a wonderful evening. Stay safe, stay vigilant, feel the feels. Don't let OCD off the hook, and we'll see you next time. Good night.